At some point in life, almost always unexpectedly, something silently breaks down inside. It's not a scream, not a visible collapse. It's more subtle. You wake up on an ordinary day and realize that the world has lost its former density. The work continues. People continue talking. Obligations remain intact, but something essential no longer responds. The enthusiasm has vanished. The effort seems theatrical, and a question begins to echo not as an isolated thought, but as a constant backdrop to the experience. Why? Why get up? Why run? Why persist? Alan Watts would say that this is not a moment of failure, but of emerging lucidity. It is when the mind, tired of repeating borrowed stories, begins to suspect that perhaps there was never a real reason behind it all. For years, you believed there was an invisible script guiding every step. Study to win, work hard, love to complete, build something to justify your own existence. These ideas didn't come from nowhere. They were taught, reinforced, celebrated. They became the silent backdrop of your identity. Watts observed that humans rarely question the game while they are winning symbolic chips. But when the game loses its luster, when the rewards no longer convince, consciousness begins to awaken to something disturbing. Perhaps there never was a final prize. This awakening doesn't bring relief. It comes with estrangement, a feeling of emptiness that isn't ordinary sadness, but an absence of direction. You look around and everything seems to keep functioning, but without a soul, like a stage set up after the actors have left. It's at this point that many believe they are broken, failing, depressed. Watts insisted on inverting this interpretation. For him, this discomfort is a sign that the mind has begun to perceive the artificiality of the collective narrative. It's like waking up in the middle of a dream and realizing you were running without knowing why. If none of this has the weight it seemed to have, what remains? This question isn't meant to be answered quickly. It's meant to dissolve certainties, create tension, to tear up the familiar ground. The ego is startled because it has always sustained itself on external meanings. Without them, it falters. You feel as if you're floating weightlessly, and perhaps you are. Watts suggested that this is the first glimpse of freedom, although almost no one recognizes it as such at first. The most disconcerting thing is not the absence of meaning, but the realization that meaning has always been assigned, never discovered. That value has never been in things themselves, but in the story you've told about them. This insight doesn't comfort, it destabilizes. It creates an inner silence where before there were goals, noise, urgency, and in this silence, something begins to form. Not an answer, but an opening, a space where the question still pulsates. And it is precisely there that this journey begins, before any escape or any explanation. In the instant you realize that perhaps you have awakened, but you still don't know what it means to be awake. When this feeling sets in, it doesn't come with instructions. The world doesn't pause for you to reflect. The alarm clock rings, messages arrive, bills are due, and you try to continue as before. But now with a constant internal noise, Watts observed that, faced with this discomfort, most people react instinctively by trying to escape. The escape isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it disguises itself as productivity, more work, more projects, more goals. Other times it takes the form of continuous distraction, rushed relationships, excessive consumption, constantly filling time, all to avoid facing the feeling that something fundamental has lost its meaning. Imagine someone sitting in traffic, looking at their watch, irritated, late for a place they no longer want to be, or someone at a dinner surrounded by people, smiling, while inside they feel an inexplicable distance. These scenes are common, almost banal, but hidden within them lies a profound phenomenon, the desperate effort to keep alive a narrative that no longer convinces. Watts said that the ego prefers any answer to facing the void, even if that answer is suffering. There is also a second reaction, More silent and equally dangerous, internal resignation. Person doesn't run away, but surrenders to a paralyzing cynicism. Nothing matters, so nothing is worth the effort. Life becomes a burden to be carried. Initial awakening transforms into stagnation. This is the moment when the mind confuses the collapse of illusions with the end of vitality, as if, upon realizing that the stage is false, nothing remains but darkness. But observe carefully, both escape and resignation stem from the same unquestioned assumption, that emptiness is a mistake, something that needs to be corrected, filled, overcome. Watts proposed a radical inversion. What if emptiness were not a defect, but a newly opened space? What if what seems like absence were, in fact, the removal of an excess of stories? In everyday life, this manifests as small cracks, moments when you stop, even if only 4 seconds, and feel you don't need to be anywhere else. Instants when the mental noise diminishes and only direct experience remains. These moments are frightening because they offer no guarantees. They don't promise progress, they don't secure a future, they simply are. That's exactly what the ego can't stand. Tension grows because something within you begins to realize that perhaps the relentless search for meaning is part of the problem, not the solution. This realization doesn't come with ready-made answers. It comes as an uncomfortable invitation, call to stop running, remain to look at the void without trying to name it. And it is at this point that the narrative changes tone, because what seemed like a threat begins, slowly, to reveal another side. Watts often said that emptiness is only terrifying while we try to fill it. When you stop fighting against it, something unexpected happens. The sensation of falling transforms into suspension. There is no ground, but there is also no impact. It's like realizing you were struggling in water without noticing you already knew how to float. This change is not conceptual, it is felt in the body, in the rhythm of breathing, the way time is organized. You begin to notice that many of your choices were never truly your own. They were automatic responses to unseen expectations. Working harder to be someone, suffering more to prove your worth, planning incessantly to justify the present. Watts saw this as a sophisticated form of slavery, not imposed by external force, but maintained by internal belief. When that belief weakens, an inevitable question arises. Who am I without the roles I've played? This question doesn't ask for a new identity, it dissolves the need for one. Here, theosophical thought finds an echo. Separate self begins to lose its contours. The notion of the individual as an isolated entity gives way to something more fluid, a momentary expression of a greater whole. But beware, this insight can become just another idea if treated as a conclusion. Watts insisted that the danger lies in transforming awakening into a concept, a banner, a new intellectual prison. You might feel the urge to tell someone, to explain, to name it. But the more you try to define it, the more it eludes you, because what is being revealed is not something that can be possessed. It is a silent acknowledgement that life wasn't waiting for your understanding to happen. It has always been in motion before and after your interpretations. And then a subtle rupture occurs. The search begins to feel strange. The question of purpose loses its urgency, not because it has been answered, but because perhaps it was never necessary. This doesn't bring euphoria. It brings a profound stillness, a serene strangeness, as if you were seeing the world for the first time, without subtitles. What if emptiness wasn't absence? Space. What if that space was essential for something broader to be perceived? These questions don't demand an immediate answer. They exist to keep the mind open, vulnerable, awake. Because what's approaching isn't an explanation, but a radical shift in perspective. At this point, something curious happens. The grandiose stories begin to lose their appeal. The idea of a life mission, of a special destiny, of a higher purpose begins to sound too heavy. Watts observed that even spirituality can become a refuge for the ego. elegant way to continue feeling special, but direct experience points in another direction, a disconcertingly simple direction. Realize that life keeps happening without asking permission. Your heart beats without consulting your plans. The day dawns without worrying about your dilemmas. And, strangely, this isn't offensive. It's liberating. Because if existence doesn't depend on your effort to justify itself, perhaps you don't need to carry that weight either. Accounts from people who have gone through this stage often include a feeling of unexpected lightness. Not because the problems have disappeared, but because the relationship with them has changed. Failure ceases to be an existential threat. Success ceases to be a test of worth. Everything becomes part of the flow. Watts compared this to a dance. There is no mistake in the dance, only movement. There is interesting data in contemporary psychology that reinforces this. Studies show that people who abandon the obsession with purpose report greater presence and well-being, not because they found answers, but because they stopped demanding that life explain itself. This is not apathy. It is participation without attachment. The improbable thing here is realizing that the less you try to control meaning, the more vivid the experience becomes. Colors seem more intense, time slows down, interactions gain depth, not because everything now matters, but because you've stopped demanding that it matters. This is a delicate point in the journey. Many retreat here. They feel they are losing something essential. But what is being lost is only the need for cosmic validation. And what is beginning to emerge is something harder to name, but impossible to ignore. Silent intimacy with one's own existence. As this understanding deepens, life begins to reveal its paradoxical nature. Nothing has ultimate meaning, yet everything is intensely lived. Watts said that this is the great game of the universe. To take nothing too seriously while becoming completely involved. Here, the tension grows because the mind wants to choose between total importance or absolute irrelevance. But experience points to something beyond this duality. Begin to live with more presence precisely because you're not trying to get anywhere. Actions cease to be stepping stones and become expressions. Work is not a means to a distant end. Love is not a contract of completeness. Creating is not an attempt at permanence. Everything is done because it is done, because it is what is happening now. There's a turning point here. The fear of death, of impermanence, of cosmic insignificance is beginning to lose its power, not because it has been overcome, but because it has ceased to be relevant. The flower doesn't suffer from wilting. The sunset doesn't lament its disappearance. Life doesn't grieve for passing. Only the human mind insists on demanding eternity to justify the moment. Watts provocatively stated that the obsession with leaving a legacy is merely a refusal to accept the dance, but when that refusal gives way, something opens up. You begin to experience life as a complete event in itself, not a rehearsal for something greater, not a preparation. A full-fledged happening, and this perception intensifies everything. The laughter becomes more unrestrained, the pain more honest, the experience more raw. There is no promise of a happy ending. There is only the intensity of the present moment, and this creates a silent expectation, not of completion, but of total surrender to what is yet to come. In the end, what remains is not an answer, but a different way of being in the world. Watts would conclude this journey, not with a conclusion, but with a simple gesture, an invitation. When everything seems meaningless, stop asking. Look, breathe, do what is in front of you. Eat, walk, work, love. Not because it will lead somewhere, but because it is life itself manifesting through you. Putting this into practice doesn't require isolation or renunciation. It requires presence. When you're working, work. When you're listening to someone, listen. When you're tired, rest. Without turning every action into a symbol of something greater, without carrying the weight of needing to be someone special, you are not here to fulfill a cosmic role. You are already the expression of the cosmos in motion, Transformation happens when you realize you don't need to fix your life to live it fully. The emptiness that once frightened you becomes space, space to breathe, feel, to be. And ironically, it is in this space that life becomes richer, more alive, more real. If anything in this journey resonated with you, allow yourself to continue this reflection. Share your experience in the comments, even anonymously. Like this video so that this message reaches more people who may be experiencing this same inner silence. And subscribe to the channel to continue exploring these ideas that don't offer easy answers, but open profound doors. Because living isn't about finding meaning, it's about participating in the mystery.